Doom is kind of a big deal. It's more than just a popular franchise, it is absolutely iconic, and the original Doom is a significant landmark in the history of video games. To not get Doom, even if you don't like it, even if it's not to your personal taste, is to not get a significant chunk of what's made video games what they are today. So, a gameplay trailer for the new Doom game was just showcased at E3. Most of the people present seemed to be very excited about it and very impressed with the trailer. A couple of people commenting on it online though were less taken in by the display. Jonathan McIntosh of Feminist Frequency wrote, "We just saw a packed auditorium full of adults cheering at seeing bodies cut in half with a chainsaw. Really think about that for a moment." Before I comment, let's take a look at one of the scenes he's talking about. Oh, he's not talking about anything real. They were cheering at a fictional representation of an alien being attacked with a chainsaw. I've really thought about it for a moment. It's absolutely fine, and it's pretty cool. The industry is at a place where gamers are both addicted to and desensitized to brutality, so each year developers try to go more extreme. What you're calling brutality isn't really like brutality you'd see in real life. I think getting bumped into in the supermarket is more intense than this game. If it really were like real-life violence, people would be repulsed by it. They wouldn't be able to enjoy it. But it isn't that realistic at all. It's like a piñata that gives you the impression of something like that happening in real life that you can then imagine based off of this, but it is nothing like looking at it actually happening. While the style does draw from real life violence, it does not, as a whole, put across the impression of real life violence. This fantasy violence is a thing in and of itself. And why have games always been so fixated on violence? I think there's a very good reason for this, and it's not to do with gamers being bloodthirsty freaks. What if I were to suggest that video games, as a medium, simply suit violence? They provide you with a very powerful palette to depict it with. People keep talking about wanting to expand gaming to have more sensitive things, but what they describe are outcomes we've already had from books and whatnot. I'm not saying there's no space for them or anything like that. They just aren't as exciting. When it comes to sensitive narratives and things like that, you can get a lot out of it just from someone describing it. This trailer, how much would you get out of this trailer from someone just describing it compared to watching it, as opposed to a sad story? Obviously, in all instances, the best experience is going to be actually engaging with it, but what I'm trying to say is, violence is something that is felt. It is something that is directly experienced and is hard to put into words. Of course, things built around a traditional narrative cannot be fully conveyed just by describing them, but because it's about the narrative, you can put the narrative across to the person. Think of a story you like. Think about how much of that story you could convey to someone just by telling them about it. Now, imagine a painting based on that story. How much of that painting could you convey to someone without them directly experiencing it? Now consider a movie based on that story. How much of that movie could you convey? You could convey pretty much the entirety of the narrative, you could summarize it at least, but which bits couldn't you convey just from telling them? Which bits would they have to experience? I would say the more subtle elements of visuals and audio, the things that play more directly with your senses to cause an immediate emotional reaction or sensation. No matter how important they are for the atmosphere of the film, you're unlikely to, when asked what was the film about, list off little elements like that. The way the tone of someone's voice changed, the change in color scheme, anything like that, you're more likely to tell them a story. On the rare occasions when a film is more about that than the story, or even if there isn't really a story, people can appreciate it. They seem to accept that. They seem to instinctively say, well, there isn't much of a story, but it's about this, experiencing this, instead of just going, there isn't much of a story, and leaving it there. It is a more complicated spectrum, of course, but overall, I see people approaching films more like this. In video games criticism, I think I see people get a bit confused. In games where it's clearly, very clearly about the story, they seem to recognize that. in games where it's very, very clearly about being a sensory experience, they recognize that. With anything else, they either choose one lens or the other and refuse to engage with a game on its own terms. Obviously, I haven't played this Doom game, but previous Doom games I would put more in the camp of sensory experiences. Yes, it's not completely loose, there is some kind of story and you go through the game on a certain path. And of course the gameplay, actually winning and being good, is a big part. But I'd say that all feeds into the atmosphere, the direct feeling that I can't quite explain. I'm sorry this has been so long-winded, but I think I needed to say that to make what I'm about to say make sense. People were not cheering at a body being cut in half by a chainsaw. They were cheering at the sensation the use of that as part of their creative palette caused them to see, combined with the sound and other visuals. They were not thinking, yes, someone got cut in half, great, in the same way they would think after reading Lord of the Rings, yes, great, Gandalf came back. They were cheering it in the same way you would cheer the Balrog showing up in a Lord of the Rings film. The intensity they've created in that situation is worthy of applause. He's treating it as if the narrative of the Doom game is, you shoot this guy, then you cut this guy, then you chainsaw this guy, whereas I would put all of that into the realm of direct experience and causing sensation. But I guess that still doesn't explain, why is it so often violence? Violence is something physical done by something to something else. It's also something your average person doesn't really engage in. Most other emotional engagement, I think it would be fair to say, comes from things we often do and can relate to more easily. For the most part, it would come from dialogue, talking to someone, seeing something, thinking about something. Violence, though, that is something that really changes when you're in control of it, when you have responsibility, when it's down to your agency. And I think in that regard, violence is a bit different to other interactions, and that is why it suits video games so well. Other things work fine in video games, but they also work well in film and books. I think we see so much violence in big games because its depiction is a strength of the medium and a weakness of other media. Jonathan McIntosh asks, but what message does that send to the world about the gaming community? What message does it send to people outside the gaming community, people outside gaming culture, people who don't get it? I know exactly what message it sends, Jonathan, because you keep tweeting. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions.